Hello, so this is my fifth post for you guys. We've had 4 weeks of looking at home, in the garden and on the doorstep for inspiration, so you should have a good bank of images to go over and look at by now. So for this week, what I want to do is share with you my workflow, what I do with the photos once I've taken them. It's a process that I've developed over a good number of years and refined over time, and it's an organic thing, so it still changes now if I see a video or have a conversation with someone where something that they do seems a better way to approach it. So I'm not afraid to change that system, but it's a good system, and hopefully you guys can, whether you take it from start to finish or just take out little bits of it, hopefully there's something for everyone to take away however they want to approach their images after taking them. Now Adobe features heavily in this. If you don't use Adobe, that's okay. There's most software systems are relatively similar, so there's bits you can adapt for your own software, or at the moment it's Adobe always do a free trial, and we've got a lot of time. Most of us have a lot of time on our hands now, so what better time to give a free trial a go and really delve into the Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom and see what they have to offer for you. I'm not getting paid by Adobe to do this, but I did want to give them a quick shout out because they have given me a subscription holiday, which is really appreciated at times like this when it's a bit tough. And these corporations do get a bit of a bashing at times like this, so it's good to sort of give a little bit of praise when they do something good and right. So thanks Adobe. Now I've been using Adobe since I didn't do A-levels. I did a national diploma in photography, and that's when I was first introduced to Photoshop, and I've been using Adobe software to varying degrees ever since. As I said, there's other software out there that can do similar things, but Adobe has always sort of been at the forefront of how I edit and process my photos. So just before we jump into the computer and I share that workflow with you, I'll give you a little bit of info about the setup. I shoot on the camera into two cards, so the same photo goes onto two different memory cards, so I have a backup on one card in case anything happens to the other card. From there I will use a card reader and just click and drag the photos not onto the computer, but onto an external hard drive. Now, if anyone uses Lightroom, one of the common problems with Lightroom is when you move files. So if you are loading photos onto your computer or your laptop and then you move them later, it's going to be harder for Lightroom and other software programs to find those photos. So I tend to try and keep the photos where they're going to stay, so there's not those kind of problems. So they go straight onto an external hard drive, and then they'll go on to a portable backup hard drive as well. So if anything happens to that hard drive, I've got another backup of them. So that's where we're at, and now we're going to jump into the computer and I'll share with you what I do from that point on. Welcome to my iMac. This isn't my image, by the way. This is the OS operating system image, so don't bother complimenting me on such a nice image. Right, so like I said, we just open up. So I've opened up my camera photos here, and it's just a matter of clicking and dragging. So select all, which is a Command A, and then I'm going to open up my external hard drive, CR2 files it's called. So most of my CR2 files are kept in folders by the year. So we go into 2020, then we go into a month, which is April, and then I'll call it something like, so this is from a sunset last night, so terrace, that's the terrace block that we live on, sunset, and double click there, select it all, click and drag. Okay, so while that's going, I'm going to open up Lightroom. Shouldn't take too long to copy over. Lightroom will load up. Now, the importing bit can be one of the bits where people struggle with Lightroom. So I'm just going to go over to Library now. Now the key thing here is that where I'm copying these photos to here is where those photos stay. So even though I'm importing into Lightroom, as long as I do it the right way, these files aren't going to move anywhere. They stay exactly where I decided to put them, which is one of the reasons I don't like using software to import stuff, because you can lose where those files go sometimes. So I'm going to click import. I'm just going to check, double check that it's copied over. It's all copied over. So we've got copy here, so it's copied, so copy photos. That's because its source has gone straight to my camera card and it's trying to copy them over. But I'm going to go add. Hold on, it won't let me add because I'm on that. So I'm going to go into exactly where we got them from, or where we copied them to even. Terrace sunset, there we go. Okay, so now we've gone to add. So I always use this add, so it just means it add photos to the catalogue without moving them, so they stay in exactly the same place, and that's going to save us a lot of headaches in the future. So add and import. Okay, so the import's happened, and now what we'll go straight into is deciding which ones we're going to keep, which ones we're going to get rid of. If you don't like these bars on the left, you can left and right, you can just hit the tab key and that will get rid of them. I like keeping them in because it means I can keep an eye on the settings. So if settings, like say the ISO suddenly shot right up, or the shutter speed went down where I think there might be, the quality of the image might be compromised, I can then pick that out from that information there and look at it a little bit closer. So firstly, this one's, the focus has come right at the front, so the most of the photos out of focus. So I'm just going to hit the letter X on my keyboard and set that as rejected. That one's okay. So literally just going to do a quick scroll through to begin with and get rid of any that I don't want straight away. Our rejects. I've gone through it now. So what we can do, I'm in QuickTime. Right. So remove, delete. So sorry, we go up to photo, delete rejected photos. Now you get the option. So there's 18 that we're definitely taking off. And I go delete from disk. Okay, it seems a bit dramatic. It's good to save some space on these hard drives and stuff. So we save with digital, we save money on film, but we spend money on storage space. So the more we can save on storage space, the better. Now, don't panic because you do get a little bit of a clause here, because those images stay in the bin until you empty it, and then when you empty it, so you can always double check quickly before you empty it that you haven't accidentally got rid of award-winning image or whatever. Right, so let's go back here. Right, okay, so we've got rid of all the ones that, so we literally just went through and picked out the ones that, yeah, definitely not going to happen. I tend to like to keep anything that's sort of half okay that could work. So we've still got quite a few. So these three, for example, 4, 5, they're very similar. I'm only going to use one from this, but I tend to keep them all on file. Just in, it's just one of those things I just keep on file. So what I'm going to have to do is decide which one I'm going to keep. And it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. So, we're looking for sharpness, quality, but really what we're looking for is something that just does that grab. Now, what I like about this one is we've still got the lights on there, the light reflecting the wires coming out of there, and we've got the shimmer, but we don't have that lens flare. That lens flare there, which I don't like falling on there, but then I do like the streaks. So it's not an easy thing here, whereas this, the lens flare moves away from those aerials, and we've got those streaks. So it may be between. So I'm going to just do a P on there as flag of pic, and a P on here as pic, and then we'll move on to the next ones. Okay, so then I'll just go through these as a little group to see which ones work for me. Okay, so now we've got our pics, and while we were going through there, you might have noticed that I've added a few more flags where they've been either a little bit of camera shake or the focus hasn't quite been right. So what I can do now is get rid of a few more. So delete rejected photos, delete from desk. So we've freed up even that little bit more space. So the ones you can see, I've picked some with the white flag, but there's a lot of blank ones. So the ones that haven't been picked, I've decided to keep on file just in case I get halfway through one and decide something's not quite right. I've still got some other similar versions that might work better. So once you start working on photos, sometimes things can either work or not work, and for various reasons. So I don't like getting rid of absolutely everything. I keep ones that are very similar that I can't quite work out whether to keep them or not on the file, for there's no reason to get rid of them, if that makes sense. So the ones that we've picked, so we just go down to this filter here, hopefully, and then select flagged. So now we've got our pics. So we've gone through, okay, so we've got 24 photos now from, I don't know, there was probably around about 100 there, wasn't there? And now I will go through the development bit of them. So I'll probably find one, that one might do, one of that. And I'll just do a little bit of editing on one of them for you. I'll pick one out and I'll show you. Okay, I'm going to pick this one for now. So the first starting point is lens correction. I'm checking these two boxes. If your lens correction doesn't quite come up, one of the things you can do is you just select your make, and then select your model, and usually it'll populate by then, but you can refine it by these drop down menus and set it up there. Sometimes it can look a little bit much, and you can just do it yourself manually, but I think on there it looks okay to me. So then we'll go up to the basic, check the colours are right. So you can either go, usually flick between as shot, and just to see what auto does, but it's actually very similar, not much in difference. I think the colour seems alright to me. Then we've got these panels, obviously. I'm not going to go into too much of this stuff, just because it's not a Lightroom workshop, is it? I'm just showing you my workflow. But you know, this clarity tool, you always spot a newbie to Lightroom because they tend to like doing stuff like this with their photos, and then they'll look at it in about a month or two's time and go, oh dear, what have I done? Same with saturation as well. So I tend to try and keep clarity under 30 at least, and I think you don't really need too much on this one actually. Same with saturation, people tend to go a bit crazy with saturation. I mean, there's not really any need. The problem is once you go with the saturation, anything less than that suddenly looks dull, doesn't it? But I don't think there's too much. I mean, I might just put 5 or 6 here for there. Shadows, it's quite useful if you wanted to do some sort of bring back some of the details. And the reason I'm able to bring back some of these details and pull back some of these highlights is because I shoot in RAW. If I was shooting in JPEG, it would be, you couldn't do quite as much, but I don't think there's too much highlights. And to be honest, I don't want to bring back the shadows because I'm quite, you see, once you bring the detail back in the shadows, this area here
starts to become a bit more distracting. So it's quite nice having that as a as silhouetted and darkened. And actually, this area here, I'm quite tempted to just give this a quick go, just to remove. So I've got a little circle here, and I'm actually going to darken this area a bit more, just so it's a little bit less distracting. Let's see. Yeah. So it's a little bit less distracting now, so we can actually see there's a little bit of a less impact in the photo. Right, so I think, don't know, I'm not even sure it needs any cropping really. So the key bit with this really is the editing, is the export even. So I'm going to do a quick export. So file, export, and then I choose. So my file system for exporting is, so let's go. So you can see for this, the files from the camera, they go into their years, okay? So 2020, yada yada. So once I export the photos, they go into the folder called photography. Now this will go into a project called From the Terrace, which is interesting photos that are taken from taken around our house that is in the middle of a Victorian terrace block. So, and then I'm just going to do sunset. So I'm going to do April. I think there's already a sunset April because I'm doing a lot of photos from the house right now, but I don't think I've done it with brackets. If that's right, sunset April, done. Right, so choose that. So that's where I'm exporting to, okay? Next thing, file settings. I export as TIFF because I don't like to compress the files when I export them. Largely because I'm going to open them up in Photoshop afterwards. So if I wasn't going to open up again, you could export it as a JPEG, but because I might do some more work on Photoshop, I'm going to export it as TIFF with no compression, so I can keep that image quality. Color space, Adobe RGB 1998. Select this. Some people might want to prefer selecting sRGB, but generally I keep it to Adobe RGB 1998, largely because whatever I'm going to do with it, it might go to a printer or it might go into a competition. More often than not, they want the colour space being Adobe RGB 1998, so it's the most common sort of colour space that I will be sending off to requirements for whoever I'm sending them off to. Compression, none. Bit depth, 8 or 16. Now if you select 16, you're doubling the file size, but it does introduce a lot more colours, and for things like sunsets, it is quite worthwhile doing because you have that quite a strong range of colours and contrast. So bit depth 16 does give you that little bit more, well, a lot more to play with, a lot more colours and to play with in contrasty images especially. So I think, oh yeah, so the other important thing is resolution 300, because I'm always thinking about printing stuff, so if you're printing, you want your resolution at 300. And that's good to go, so I'm going to export that. And I might do the same sort of process with any of the other ones. So the other ones at the beginning probably need a little bit more work, so I could show you a little bit like that. I didn't quite decide on which one I wanted to go with. Let's start with this one. So definitely want to bring the highlights in there at the top, for sure. Maybe some of the shadows. And then, you know, what I might do is just copy that and see how the other photo holds up with similar settings, and then start. Definitely nicer streaks on this one, isn't there? So I think we might stick with this one. See, again, this area here is kind of, I like the light catching these lines, but I'm not massively keen. Well, what I can do, actually, well, why don't we open that in Photoshop? We've got a little mark on the sensor there as well. So you can do a little bit of clone stamping and removing items and stuff in Lightroom, but I much prefer Photoshop. It's a much more sophisticated thing. Don't want to go too over the top here. Right, this isn't my favourite image in the world, but it's got a few things that might be quite worth looking at in Photoshop that can that'll be useful for you guys. Just going to bring that down. Let's have a quick look at auto. Okay, cool. So, oh, do you know what I haven't done? I haven't done my lens. In my haste, I forgot to follow my own workflow there. But you know what? I'm actually going to darken this area here, just so it isn't too distracting. Prefer that. So we're just following that line of the roof and into the sun. Alright, okay, cool. So file, export, like we did before. Right, now we've done that, I will see you in Photoshop. In the process, I've done our export. So there we go. We've got a couple of shots here. So I opened this program called Bridge, which is free from Adobe and it interacts with Photoshop quite nicely. I use it for a couple of things. We can go from Photoshop, so if we go to Tools up here, Photoshop, so we've got Contact Sheet 2. That's useful for sending out contact sheets. Quite often, maybe if I'm pitching some photos to a magazine or a newspaper, I'll send it as a contact sheet and it will just put the photos into a contact sheet for you. And then more often I will use Image Processor, which is quite good for batch processing photos. So if, for example, I was going to upload a lot of photos and get them ready for the web, for a website, I can save them as JPEG, select all the photos I want to do, and then set the actual web size I want them at, and then I just run it and it does it all for them. Also, there's actions that you can record, so presets. So this action here converts them into black and white, so I could just turn all those photos into black and white. So there's lots of things with that. So Bridge is quite useful from that point of view. So I tend to have a look and open things up from Bridge. So let's open these two up here. Photoshop. Okay, so let's just quickly go back to this one. So whenever I'm kind of removing or adding stuff, or sort of part of my workflow is usually to create a new layer or duplicate the layer anyway, so that's a command or Control J, so command on the Mac, control on a PC. And then we've got this tool here, which is spot healing brush. So I could use a spot healing brush on there. That would get rid of that. Patchwork tool works just as well. I actually prefer the patchwork tool actually, because I find it usually does it a little bit better. So like I say, you can do this sort of stuff in Lightroom, but it's just not quite as sophisticated as it is in Photoshop. I just find it much better in Photoshop doing things like that. Okay, so that's that done. Right, yeah, so I was saying earlier how just the light catching this, so for some people it might not bother them, but to me it just distracts a little bit, that bright contrast. And now we've got rid of that. It's more about Let's have a look. Just removes that distracting part of it. And you know, you could maybe, if these flare spots kind of did it, hold on, kind of don't work for you, you could get rid of these potentially as well. Now the reason I do it on the layer, on this duplicate layer here, is that I just preserve that pristine version of the file. And also, if you're entering things into competitions and stuff, quite often a lot of these competitions will, a lot of their rules are often that you don't add or remove elements, like particularly like that bush. So having this preserves the original file, but it also reminds me, so if I came back to this photo and thought, did I do any work on this? I can see, oh yes I did. So, and if the rules were you can't edit, you can't remove things from the photo, I'd have to submit this one rather than the one where I've done it. So basic, yeah. So most of the work is done. There's a much nicer photo, I think, this one. Most of the work is done on Lightroom. It's just that little bit of, sprinkles and sparkles that I tend to do in Photoshop. Just tidying it up a little bit, and it depends on sort of things. I might do some light dodging and burning just to bring out some things, highlight stuff. One of the things, I don't know. I don't want to go into a Photoshop lesson actually, so I'm just going to show you. It is literally just, going through everything, adding the final little touches in Photoshop and doing the sort of main amount of work in Lightroom. And that's the workflow really. So then you just click and save that, and it will ask me about saving layers and file size and stuff, and that's fine. So hopefully you guys found that useful and interesting to see the process. I didn't go into details too much of all the different things, because there's 101 things, 1001 things you can do in Photoshop and Lightroom, but just to give you an idea of how the flow of my editing goes, and hopefully you'll find that useful, and you can apply some of that into your own workflow, or maybe sometimes it's reassuring to see other people do something similar to you as well. So take some time, get a download for free if you like on Adobe, and spend some time getting to know it and see if you want to progress with it or not. It's not going to cost you anything, so why not now that you've got the time? And I will see you next week.